pencil
That's
something,
right.
and you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year of working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I am all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, you know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good morning, 9:30 on Wednesday, the 21st of February. This is Britain's Newsroom with GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. Well, the political prince, the Prince of Wales, has called for an end to the fighting in Gaza. But do you support the future king getting involved in this way? GB News presenter Nigel Farage says that he should stick to the BAFTAs.
And Labour's ceasefire chaos. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is facing a potential rebellion from his backbenchers over a vote on an SNP-led motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza this afternoon.
And a naval flop. A Trident missile has misfired and crashed into the ocean during a British test launch. How embarrassing is this?
And human rights violated. The transgender rider Emily Bridges ready to take the British cycling ban to the European Court of Human Rights.
And patients and their families can request a rapid second opinion from April if they are worried about a condition getting worse, as the NHS rolls out Martha's Rule in England. More power, particularly for parents. I think that story, for the parents particularly of Martha, who lost her life when there was a misdiagnosis, at least some good has come out of their hideous loss.
His mum kept saying to the doctors, she's far more serious than you think, and she was right. And don't mums normally know best?
Our instinct is often right on these things. Let us know your thoughts this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. First, though, the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 9:30. Leading the news this morning, Sir Keir Starmer is bidding to avoid rebellion as some Labour MPs threaten to vote in favour of an SNP motion today calling for an immediate halt to the fighting in Gaza. The last time the SNP called for the motion, which failed in November, over 50 of Sir Keir's MPs rebelled against him. He, though, has now shifted his stance to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but says it's dependent on both Israel and Hamas stopping the violence. However, the government has now presented its own wording calling for an immediate humanitarian pause. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle will now choose which amendments to debate in the Commons later. Patients and their families will have quick and easy access to a second medical opinion if they're worried about a condition getting worse. That's as the NHS rolls out Martha's Rule in England. The process coming into force from April. means an urgent review will be required by a different critical care team. It can be used if a patient's condition is getting rapidly worse and they or their family feel they're not getting the care they need. It follows the death of 13-year-old Martha Mills in 2021, who developed sepsis while her symptoms were missed under the care of King's College Hospital in London. Teachers and healthcare workers in England and Wales will be legally required to report cases of child sexual abuse under new government plans. The Home Secretary announced the move this morning, and if staff fail to report an incident, they could face a permanent ban from working with children. It will also mean anyone who stops someone from reporting or covering up a disclosure of child sexual abuse could go to prison for up to 7 years. James Cleverly says the aim of the government and the police is to keep children safe. And as we've heard, in a rare test launch off the coast of Florida, a Trident missile misfired and then crashed into the ocean from a British nuclear submarine, HMS Vanguard. The Ministry of Defence have confirmed that anomaly, but they say the nuclear deterrent is still safe, secure and effective. It marks the second Trident missile failure for the Royal Navy, with sources suggesting the test would have been successful if it was carried out for real with a live nuclear warhead. A search is now underway, we understand, for the munition, and a ministerial statement is set to be released to Parliament later. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen, or of course go to our website gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good morning. Welcome to Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, Labour are on the verge of another crisis over the Gaza ceasefire vote, which is in the House of Commons today around 5 p.m.
That's right. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales has spoken out on the Middle East conflict. Whilst meeting Red Cross aid workers in a statement released by Kensington Palace, the Prince of Wales said he's deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict in the Middle East, with too many lives lost.
So is it right for the future King to speak about this, particularly on the eve of this significant ceasefire vote? We're going to talk to the royal historian, Sir Anthony Selden, who joins us now. Sir Anthony, good morning to you.
Andrew.
I can't imagine Her Majesty the Queen making a statement of that nature on the eve of a Commons vote, or perhaps at any time. What's your own view? Has Prince William strayed too far into the political arena?
Well, that's always difficult, isn't it, for a Prince of Wales? If you don't say anything, then people ask, what's the point? And if you say too much, you're going to upset people. So the Queen, just before the Scottish referendum, said she hoped that people will think carefully about the vote, which was interpreted rightly as saying that she hoped that people would not want to vote for Scotland to become independent. And here he's making a statement. He's Prince of Wales, remember, he's not the monarch. His father, as Prince of Wales, made many interventions on architecture and, above all, the environment, but also on education and volunteering. I don't think myself that he's infringed territory that he shouldn't be on. He is talking as a father. His language is not that far apart from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. I think it's rather an important intervention.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also.
Not taking sides, but calling for peace.
Could I just ask one point about the statement, which some people have drawn attention to, and you'll know, Sir Anthony, that the Israeli government have accused the Prince of Wales of naivety. Well, they probably would, wouldn't they? But he says in that statement about the loss of life since October the 7th. Some have interpreted that as saying, what, he's only referring to the loss of life that Israel has inflicted on Hamas and in Gaza since the terror attack. Perhaps he could have phrased it more diplomatically?
I think he certainly would have wanted, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine he would have wanted to be balanced and not to upset either side, but to be making a call that I think most peace-loving people feel strongly about, which is that enough is enough. And what is the end point here? Where is the point of peace and settlement that one can look forward to? So I think he would have wanted, I'm sure, to have reflected the fact that this was initiated by Hamas with the death and the mass suffering of the 7th of October. So if he did get that wrong, Andrew, then I think that would have been a slip, which I'm sure he'll correct.
What's your assessment, Anthony, of the popularity of the royal family right now in 2024? Putting it in a historical context, and nobody is better at doing that than you are. Are they in a strong position right now?
So I think we just need to set it back and say that throughout history, the monarch's popularity, I mean, it's difficult to measure, isn't it, before we had opinion polls, but in the last 50, 60, 70 years, when we've had opinion polls, we can see the popularity of the monarchy has risen and fallen, but it's roughly 2/3 of the country support the monarchy. And the big question, the huge question, was would it survive the death of the Queen? How much of it was about Queen Elizabeth II, and how much of it was about the monarchy? And I think that to the surprise of many people, perhaps, King Charles and Queen Camilla have managed to keep the popularity levels at very similar to where it was for Queen Elizabeth II. And of course, there are now the huge questions, and I think outpouring of concern, as far as I can see, across the political spectrum and country for what's really happening to the King and the illness to the Princess of Wales. So, which has led many people to feel very compassionate. So I think there's a sense of support for the monarchy, the royal family, and in particular those two individuals, and an intense interest on Prince William and how he will step up and cope with the huge responsibility of being Prince of Wales and in time the King.
OK, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Royal historian there, Sir Anthony Selden. Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, joins us in the studio. Good morning.
Very good morning to you all.
Just your reflections on that a little bit, if you don't mind to start with. Was Prince William right to wade into this?
Yeah, it's a really delicate one because the Queen wouldn't have done it, as you suggested. But actually, we have to accept the world's moving on. And for the royal family to maintain its support within the country, it needs to be seen to be relevant. So instinctively, I thought, be very careful. And I think most of us of a certain generation would feel that. But equally, we have to recognise that Prince William is looking, in the nicest possible way, way beyond us of a certain generation. He's looking to the next generation, and I think they would want him to comment on things, particularly when he's Prince of Wales, not King. That's the difficulty. Look, the language is so important, but clearly they did approve it with the government. And the difficulty then is, so what did he say about Ukraine? What's he said about Syria? What's he said about Yemen and all the other horrific military crises and wars?
He did speak out after Gaza initially.
He did speak out after Gaza. So this is where it's really difficult. But on balance, I'm instinctively very cautious, but I think that the younger generation want him to be relevant and to say something, and that's why I think he's done it.
When Sir Anthony Selden talked about the Queen and the Scottish referendum, she didn't make a statement. She was talking to some people on a walkabout. She said, I do hope they'll think very carefully, which was picked up on a microphone, or somebody told a reporter. It was different, but, I mean, Her Majesty was a shrewd operator.
I mean, the shrewdest of all.
Those remarks would be picked up, but she didn't do it in a formal statement, which is what William has done.
That's right, but he made a formal statement after October the 7th. But I think they've got to be incredibly careful. We all know it's an absolute tightrope that they're walking, and the odd word here, the odd nuance there. But look, these are really difficult times, both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And I think what he's doing is reflecting deep anxiety and reflecting the fact that whatever we think about this difficult situation, Hamas is winning the propaganda war and Israel is losing it. And that's the reality of the situation.
If you were in the Commons today, we don't know whether the Labour motion is going to be called, but would you be in support of the SNP motion, which wants an immediate ceasefire?
Where I think the international community is failing is there's not enough focus on releasing the hostages, and there's not enough focus on, OK, what's the solution? You could just say there's a two-state solution, but the solution is not to have Hamas continuing to govern Gaza. If you keep sending humanitarian aid to Gaza with Hamas still in charge, guess what? They will keep nicking it. They will keep buying bombs and missiles and lobbing them into Israel. The definition of madness is keep on doing the same thing and expect a different result. The international community is failing in that sense, rather than calls to sort of virtue signal and feel good. We all want peace. We all want a sustainable ceasefire, but it's got to be credible and it's got to be permanent and durable, and there's not enough focus on that.
Are the SNP and Labour and the Conservatives also, though, today making their own political capital out of this event?
Sure. All three of them.
In what way? What are they all doing differently?
Well, sorry, Richard, I was going to say, the Tories are tabling a motion to scupper Labour.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all of this stuff actually is political games.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Bluntly, there's a lot of virtue signalling. You know, certain parties, the Labour Party, they're desperate to shore up their Muslim vote, rather than have lots and lots of independent Muslim candidates stand against them. So they've got that. The SNP is just always trying to meddle and cause mischief. That's frankly their only reason to be on earth. And so, yeah, there's a whole load of... It'll make no difference whatsoever to Israel on their objective.
They don't care.
Because they're saying the international community's failed us, we've got to defend ourselves, what other option have we got? That's their position.
Right, stay with us, Richard. You're going to be doing another section in just a moment, because up next, the Ministry of Defence has confirmed that an anomaly occurred during a missile exercise.
An anomaly? Hang on, a humiliating... a humiliation, actually, not an anomaly.
Well, we'll tell you all about it anyway. In just a moment, this humiliation. Britain's Newsroom on GB News. When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, and we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, 9:47. The leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, is still with us in the studio. Should we talk about this failed missile launch, Richard?
It's on the front page of The Sun.
This is unbelievable. I mean, it seems this missile went not much further than I can throw a cricket ball. I mean, it's just...
Show off.
Look, the reality is that you've got an aircraft carrier that can barely limp out of Portsmouth Harbour. You've got missiles that are fired and don't go anywhere, don't work. And fundamentally, we've got an MOD procurement department and clearly maintenance department that's just, like the Home Office, utterly unfit for purpose.
Yeah.
And these secretaries of states and ministers, you can't prop this stuff up. You've got to call it out, and you've got to say it's not good enough. We're going to change things.
It's interesting because Grant Shapps, the latest Defence Secretary, he's the latest in a long line.
And that's his latest job.
Yeah,
He's had a lot.
Was on board HMS Vanguard to witness the test, and the flipping missile nearly landed on his ship.
I mean,
it's just a few hundred yards from where it was launched.
It is truly unbelievable. It's interesting it's taken so long for actually this to come out now.
But it was coming up.
And the sort of the ridiculous statement from the MOD, there was an anomaly. Look, the bottom line is it failed.
Yeah.
And I think the British people, we just want the truth. And we want to know that, don't give us any waffle or cover-up. It's not good enough. We want to know it failed, it's going to be sorted, and it won't happen again. Yeah. That's what needs to happen.
Because this nuclear deterrent costs a lot of money to maintain, and I don't know how much this exercise would have cost, presumably millions.
Yeah, and look, you could say that actually, look, we all make mistakes. It's good to. That's the point of test firing. You learn when something's not working, so that you get it right for when, in the horrific event where you actually need it for real. So there's a positive that. But what you can't do is pretend it's not a problem.
No.
It is a problem. It needs sorting. Frankly, a bunch of people, at best, need a serious talking to, or more likely firing. In the way that this missile didn't.
What do the Americans make of this, who are great allies? This test was off of Florida. I mean, what are they going to make of this?
Look, that is the key issue. They need us to be a dependable ally with a strong military deterrent to sit alongside theirs. What we're spending on our defence is nothing like enough anyway. But that which we do spend, we've got to spend properly so that it works.
I'm a bit more concerned of what Russia, China and Iran make of it as opposed to America, because it's a terrible indication of how well prepared we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're sending, I know lots of people don't like this, but we're sending ammunition and weapons to Ukraine. But we're not even replacing those. We haven't got the production capacity to replace those. So all of this stuff needs to be sorted and got on top of, and fast.
Yeah.
And we need to have confidence in that.
Right, let's talk about your candidate, potential candidate for Henley-on-Thames. He has got himself into hot water because of some Twitter posts which have been deemed offensive. This guy's name is David Carpin. Where are you at with him, Richard Tice?
So he has posted some inappropriate and, frankly, daft stuff.
We've got some. If you're listening on the radio, we're putting some of them up on screen. There's one here of somebody sweeping that's the pride flag down the drain. So that's
sweeping it down the drain.
That's what he thinks of gay rights.
We're a serious political party, and I've told our candidates, you don't put daft stuff up there and inappropriate
This is particularly
stuff.
Damning, isn't it? Happy Europe Day. To all European people and countries, reject totalitarian empires. And he's done a sort of satire of the EU flag using swastikas.
Yeah, and so he's an ex-candidate. I've fired him. He's not a candidate. And that's the point. I'm a serious leader that will take decisions immediately when they need to be taken. He's gone. He's done. Finished. And people need to learn a lesson that you've got freedom of expression. That's the joy of being in a democracy like ours. But I've also got the freedom of choice as to who's going to be my candidates, and he's not going to be one of them.
And good for you for sacking him, Richard. But are you concerned perhaps that you're monitoring?
Yeah, look, but the point is, he was vetted before this, and then at some point, possibly, I don't know, he's done something daft, written something daft.
Post the vetting procedure.
Post the vetting procedure. Right. They've all been told, don't do this stuff. And if you do, you're going to be fired. It's as simple as that. We've got lots more candidates, great candidates applying, and people need to understand this. But I'm not going to take lessons from any other political party when you see what happened in the Labour Party with Azhar Ali, who was nominated with his deeply anti-Semitic comments and views, and clearly held by others in that meeting. So, yeah, I'm going to fire people who do ring whistles, but I'm not going to take lessons from any other party like the Labour Party.
On Labour, what was she? The Labour frontbencher went on a panel with him, on a platform with him, even after this story had broken.
Is it Lisa and Andy?
Lisa and Andy. And Labour had the full transcript, which showed it wasn't just vile conspiracy theories he was peddling. He was peddling horrible anti-Semitic
and that's
language.
the difference.
Yeah.
I've been made aware of it. I've fired the bloke because I've got clear convictions, principles and the ability to make decisions. They haven't. They're always looking over their shoulder, worrying about this, and that's a very bad place for the Labour Party to be.
It's interesting that Henley-on-Thames was the seat that was his, because, of course, that has been one of the safest Conservative seats for decades. It was Boris Johnson's seat, it was Michael Heseltine's seat. You've got to get the right candidate in there, because there's probably quite a lot of people who would like the things that you say.
Absolutely, and that's why... But it's the same in many seats, whether it's red wall seats or whether it's seats like Henley-on-Thames. It actually doesn't matter about the seat. It's actually about people behaving in the right way, in an appropriate way, if you want to be elected to be a Member of Parliament.
How do you sack them, by the way? Do you do it by tweet?
He's just found out. He's watching GB News.
How do you do it? Do you get on the phone? Is it brutal?
On Twitter?
No, they get a phone call. It's very simple. And, you know, look, and he's very... Freedom of speech is a precious thing, as you well know.
It really is.
And so that's that, but...
OK.
All right.
But he went too far.
We have to read, because this is Ofcom law, all the candidates standing in the Rochdale by-election, which is next week. Azhar Ali, who is still the Labour candidate, because his name's on the ballot paper. Mark Coleman, Independent. Simon Tanchuk, Reform UK. Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat. Paul Ellison, Conservative.
George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain. Michael Howarth is an independent. William Howarth, who is an independent. Guy Otten from the Green Party. Raving Rodent Subordner, the official monster raving loony. And David Tully, who is also an independent.
Still to come. Martha's Law will be rolled out across England from April. We'll tell you why we think this is a good idea. For once, we're actually agreeing. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Alex Burkill, and here's your latest GB News weather forecast on this rather wet Wednesday morning. It is going to turn brighter and sunnier, though, as we go into the afternoon. But before then, plenty of rain around across the bulk of the country first thing this morning. And the rain will be quite heavy for some of us. Watch out for spray on the roads. Some disruption is likely, especially in the southwest. Could be some flooding here as well. But as we go into the afternoon, the rain will clear away towards the east, and then we'll have plenty of sunshine developing, even though there will be a scattering of showers in a few places. It will be windy though, and so those strong winds will take the edge off the temperatures, which are well above average for the time of year. That rain fully clears away towards the east later on this evening, but a bit more wet weather is likely to push into southern parts later on in the day, and then we get another system pushing its way in from the west, and this feature is likely to bring some downpours initially across parts of northern and western areas as we go through this evening and overnight, but then as we go into tomorrow, that rain is going to feed further southeastwards, so we could see some heavy downpours across southeastern parts. As well as the rain, that front is going to bring some colder air behind it, so we are going to see temperatures dropping closer to average for the time of year, albeit sticking with the milder theme in the southeast for at least one day longer. As we look towards the weekend, and after a showery day on Friday, I'm expecting something a bit drier on Saturday, then Sunday's looking pretty damp and wet in the south. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Still to come, ITV has launched a new drama called Breathtaking, and Bev is absolutely fuming about it. We'll tell you why next.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking. Evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that. And police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment and the bureaucracy and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under and, of course, the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 21st of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Well, the political prince, the Prince of Wales, has called for an end to the fighting in Gaza, but to support the future king getting involved. GB News presenter Nigel Price says he should stick to the BAFTAs.
And Labour's ceasefire chaos. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is facing a potential rebellion from his backbenchers as MPs vote on an SNP-led motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza this afternoon.
Navy flop. I can say that again. A Trident missile has misfired and crashed into the sea during a test launch in Florida. How embarrassing is that?
And a new poll shows that most Conservative voters believe that Penny Mordaunt is the only MP who could beat Sir Keir Starmer at the next election. Really? Really? Are you a big fan of Penny Mordaunt?
I like her. I don't think she's the big problem she's got, Bev. Is she going to hold her seat? Because if you look at these polls, 20-point lead for Labour, she's going to majority about 12,000. Very vulnerable.
I'm not sure she particularly cuts through with the British public. What do you think at home?
She's most famous, of course, for holding the sword, isn't she, at the coronation?
For looking nice
for an hour.
in a frock. I mean, that's just no qualification process for becoming Prime Minister.
No.
Let us know your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.com. First, though, the very latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. The top story at 10 o'clock. Sir Keir Starmer is aiming to avoid rebellion today as some Labour MPs threaten to vote in favour of an SNP motion calling for an immediate halt to the fighting in Gaza. It has the potential to reignite a bitter row in the party. The last time the SNP called for the motion, which failed in November, more than 50 of Sir Keir's MPs rebelled against him. He, though, has now shifted his stance to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but says it's dependent on both Israel and Hamas stopping the violence. However, the government has also presented its own proposal, calling for what they've called a humanitarian pause. It's now up to the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, to determine which amendments will be debated in the Commons later. Meanwhile, Israel has thanked Prince William after he released a statement calling for the fighting in Gaza to end as soon as possible. An Israeli spokesperson has also said they want the fighting to end and pointed to comments the Prince of Wales made in October last year, which they say reaffirm that Israel has the right to defend itself. Patients and their families will have quick and easy access to a second medical opinion if they're worried about a condition getting worse. That's as the NHS rolls out Martha's Rule in England. The process, coming into force from April, means an urgent review will be required by a different critical care team. It can be used if a patient's condition is getting rapidly worse and their family or friends feel they're not getting the care they need. It follows the death of 13-year-old Martha Mills in 2021, who herself developed sepsis while under the care of King's College Hospital in London because her symptoms were missed. As we've heard today, a Trident missile has misfired and then crashed into the ocean in a rare test launch off the coast of Florida. The spectacular failure happened while Defence Secretary Grant Shapps watched on from aboard a British nuclear submarine, HMS Vanguard. The Ministry of Defence confirmed the anomaly, but insists the deterrent is still safe, secure and, they say, effective. It's the second Trident missile failure for the Royal Navy, and it's an expensive one, with each missile costing around £17 million. A ministerial statement is expected later as questions are raised over Britain's defences. Teachers and healthcare workers in England and Wales will be legally required to report cases of child sexual abuse. That's under new government plans. The Home Secretary announced the move this morning, and if staff fail to report an incident, they could face a permanent ban from working with children. It also means anyone who stops someone from reporting or covers up a disclosure of child sexual abuse could go to prison for up to 7 years. James Cleverly says the aim of the government and the police is to keep children safe.
Do the right thing. That's all we're saying. Do the right thing. If things are brought to your attention, then report them. And we would prefer that reports happen, that can be investigated and then discounted if they are not examples of criminality. But what we've seen, sadly, is far too many cases where abuse was happening, where it was known to be happening, and action wasn't taken, and that's what we're seeking to address.
And some more developments in a case we've been following here at GB News. Police have now resumed their search for a toddler who went missing in Leicester. The 2-year-old was with his family on Sunday near a local nature reserve when he fell into the River Soar. It's understood the boy's father had then gone into the river to try to rescue the 2-year-old, but he was unable to find him. Police are gathering once again as protesters and police are gathering once again outside the Royal Courts of Justice as WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange makes a final appeal against possible extradition to the US. The National Union of Journalists are holding a Free Julian Assange demonstration outside the courts in London, and it's part of a long-running case that could be his final chance to avoid spending the rest of his life in a US prison. Earlier, his brother Gabriel Shipton told us that Julian's actions have only ever had good intentions.
I would say he's a journalist and a publisher, but using technology to do that in a new way that maybe we're not so used to. And the thing about this indictment, it doesn't really matter if Julian's a journalist or not. What it does is criminalise journalistic activity. So publishing truthful information, the relationship between a source, a journalist and a publisher. That's really what is at the heart of this indictment and why you see journalistic organisations coming out in support of Julian.
Those are the headlines. To keep across the day's other stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
10:06. Here's Britain's Newsroom with GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Thank you for getting in touch this morning. You've been wading into whether Prince William should be wading into politics. Christine, from a very wet puddle town, which is in Dorset, says, I'm an ardent royalist, but the royals should not be getting involved in political matters. He's giving the impression of taking sides. If he wants to be involved in politics, he must give up his royal role. I didn't hear him calling for the same in Russia. The Israeli government must deal with the terrorist atrocities as they see fit.
Well, that's the problem.
It is, and I think this is the can of worms you open when, as a royal, you start getting in politics, because Trevor has said the prince should look at his own country before he starts jumping on the bandwagon. What does he think of the grooming gangs, mass immigration and NHS down the toilet? Because everybody will want him to come out and speak on behalf of the issues that we all feel strongly about.
Of course. And then it's quite interesting, Richard Tice talking about the SNP earlier, saying that they exist only to create mischief. Rob from Loughborough says, I agree, the SNP is only there to create mischief, but what's the difference in that regard between the SNP and reform?
Yeah, well, Prince William, another one, Jack has said he's not king, but when he is, he won't be able to make such comments. His father, as the Prince of Wales, often commented on various issues.
Yeah, he steered a million miles away, though, from the Middle East.
That's right. So, on this particular story, Henry Hill is in, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Henry, always good to see you.
Morning.
Did he go too far?
I think the fact, regardless of what you think of the actual statement, which you can argue either way, I think the fact that his comments are front pages or the headlines of several national newspapers is probably a sign that he went too far, or that he said it in a too newsworthy a way and at the wrong time. Because ultimately, the role of the monarchy in modern Britain is to be a unifying force. It's largely above politics. And as you say, the moment you start doing this, suddenly the question is, why didn't you talk about Russia? Why didn't you talk about X, Y and Z? And if you don't have that iron principle that we don't talk about politics, then your decision to talk about X and not Y looks itself like a political judgment.
And it is not a coincidence that Her Majesty the Queen, probably the most travelled head of state, never ever went to Israel. The Foreign Office wouldn't allow her to go. I'm sure she wanted to. Prince Charles, the King, never went. Duke of Edinburgh went for his mother's funeral, because it is such a diplomatic and political minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. It is deeply unfortunate that Israel, which has been a very strong ally of the United Kingdom for a long time, is in that position. But you can imagine if you did do a royal visit, you'd have to do a royal visit to the West Bank. The security involved in that would just be unbelievable. But I think that the problem is, as well, there is a real sensitivity about the singling out of Israel, regardless of what you think about the specifics of the situation in Gaza, which is obviously horrifying. The singling out of Israel when there are Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there are so many other crises around the world. And this doesn't help, because even if you exclude him not talking about domestic issues, why does he not speak out, or at least in front-page manner, about all of these other problems? I think this was a misjudgment.
And with the Commons vote today, that's what I found very odd. He could have done this next week or last week, but the day before the Commons vote, which has caused all sorts of problems for the Labour Party, and we haven't even had the vote.
Yeah, and that is maybe the most egregious, because I do sympathise with the Palace, because in a 24-hour news cycle now, there is so much more pressure to comment than there was previously when you just had the evening papers and so on, because the fact that you don't comment can be a story that runs and runs and runs. But he could have done this last week, next week. The other day, because of notwithstanding the substance of the issue again, the danger is it looks like he has been drawn into party politics by making life awkward for the Labour Party. And as a Conservative, I want Labour to feel as safe with the monarchy and able to trust the King and the Prince of Wales as the Conservatives do. And this doesn't help that.
Can we also talk about Penny Mordaunt riding high in one particular poll, apparently, that if she was the leader of the Conservative Party, they might win the next election? I personally find that a little hard to believe. You do a monthly poll, do you agree?
We have not done our monthly survey and looked at the Mordaunt question specifically. Maybe we will. I think anyone salvaging the next election, like actually winning for the Conservatives, when you think they've got a sort of 15 to 20-point polling deficit, all of those accumulated problems, it does seem a little bit like wishful thinking. And Penny Mordaunt's problem, the same thing that sunk her last leadership campaign, she wrote that book full of things that Conservative members and probably Conservative voters will really dislike. And
remind us a lot of the identity politics.
Yeah, the identity
people.
Yeah, the identity politics and stuff. It was basically like an awful lot of sort of The Tories just need to reconcile themselves to the other side winning the culture war on X, Y and Z. Now, you can think what you want about individual culture war issues, but that overall approach was wildly unpopular. Her leadership campaign was sunk just by people, like, reading her book in public and quoting it. And that will happen again if she runs again.
Well, newspapers like mine went through it page by page. Yeah. And thought, oh, this is what the woman who would be Conservative Prime Minister thinks, does she?
Super woke.
Yeah, I think that the Conservatives are almost certainly going to lose the next election. And after that, they are going to face a real challenge intellectually to work out why they did achieve so little in 14 years in office. What's their diagnosis for the Britain of 2024? I've not seen much evidence that Penny Mordaunt has done really much thinking about that. It seems to be most of her modernisation, as David Cameron would probably have called it, is just kind of trying to shut down points of disagreement with the left. It's not thinking really deeply and structurally about the economy and society.
We saw Rishi Sunak have a rare Conservative victory yesterday, I would say, talking at the Farmers' Conference, because what he said has gone down very well. It's gone down very well on social media, where a lot of the farmers are campaigning with their No Farmers, No Food campaign. We had two farmers on, a Welsh and an English farmer, and they both thought they liked what he had to say. Is this Rishi Sunak stepping up now and responding to public pressure in a way that might get him a few votes?
It's good for the Downing Street to have achieved that kind of win, and it's always nice that Welsh Labour exists, because if nothing else, the Conservatives can always point to the Labour.
This is what happens if you get a Labour government, because they've been in power.
Well, in
for 20
2015,
years.
David Cameron got to run on the NHS because the Welsh NHS was so bad. The Labour government in Cardiff is really phenomenally awful at running things. The question is whether or not he can apply this to more areas, because a package for farmers would be politically good for the Conservatives, but let's face it, rural Britain is not where Labour and the Liberal Democrats are really closing in on the Conservatives, right? So it's, can you find an offer for suburban professionals, young families? I think that's going to be much harder, but at least this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, how are you going to get people on the housing ladder?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and not by just pumping more demand in. This proposal from Gove that's been shot down for 50-year mortgages. You get to the point where 20, 30 years ago, you bought a house, you paid it off in 10 years, and then now we're getting to the point where, in order to create home ownership, you're leaving a mortgage to your children. That's not a viable solution.
One of my favourite games on this show is when is the next election going to be? What's your thoughts?
I still think the odds are for October, November, just because the Prime Minister's personal instinct will be to punt it long, but there are really strong reasons the Conservative Party would benefit from having one in May. If you have it at the local elections, you save hundreds of Tory councillors, because less motivated Tory voters come out and vote. All of those councillors, even if they don't like Rishi Sunak, are out campaigning for their own seats. So you have the strongest possible ground machine, and you avoid having a summer of crossings. And I think that the danger for the Conservatives is, I think, that I suspect parts of the government expected the Lords or the Commons to kill the Rwanda bill. And there's a real danger for them if the Rwanda bill passes and then we have a summer of crossings and it is visibly seen not to work. That would be absolutely catastrophic. So they might go in May. They've run the budget very early to leave enough time.
I've had money on May for a long time.
I spoke to an MP at the weekend, a Tory MP, who thinks it might go January 25.
I mean, that would be insane, right? I mean, just go in November. There's no advantage to going in January over November, except you've ruined people's Christmases.
Yeah, right. And they did that a couple of years ago, but let's not start Bev off, because that was lockdown.
Right. Thanks, Harry. Henry, good to see you. Henry Hill there, not Harry Hill. Someone completely different. Right, still to come. Female trans cyclist Emily Bridges is ready to take British cycling to court as she feels that her trans ruling has violated her human rights. Of course, she was born male, she's transitioned to be female, and she's going to take this to the highest level so that she can beat women on bikes. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat. Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10:18, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. We've got the panel here. Stephen Pound, you know him, former MP, and Mike Parry, the broadcaster. And they always disagree, which is why we love them.
Now then, gentlemen, shall we start with the Gaza ceasefire? Commons debate going on today. Should there be a ceasefire, Stephen Pound? And what is this going to mean for each of these political parties? Because they're all tinkering around with their own ambitions here a little, aren't they?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, it's an evolving situation, and quite clearly there's a huge hunger in the country, in fact, much wider than that, for something to be done. The difficulty is, what can you do? And I think the SNP have been rather disingenuous with their motion. I hate to say accuse the SNP of being opportunist.
Well, they're being political. That's what they do. That's
what Labour do. But isn't this a bit more important than that?
Yeah, I mean, come on, Steve. Don't be naive. That's what
Andrew, I'm not. OK, I appreciate they're doing that, but I'm not going to forgive them for doing that.
Right.
And I also think that Diane Abbott's comments today, when she's still a member of the Labour Party, referring to Keir Starmer's motion as weasel words, is very, very unhelpful. Look, every single human being with a drop of humanity in their body wants to end the horror in Gaza. But do you honestly think that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to say we're going to pull the troops out of Rafah because there's been a vote in the House of Commons in London? You know, wake up. I'm sorry.
Mike?
Well, the whole world is changing its mind now, isn't it, on the Hamas situation? I mean, initially, October the 7th and all that, there was 100% support, almost 100%, apart from countries in the Middle East and all that. But now the whole world, you know, starting in America, drifting across the Atlantic, all the way through Europe, is saying the slaughter can't go on. Nobody's... I'm certainly not calling for a ceasefire, but I do wish the killing would stop.
Yeah.
And I was talking to people about this last night. Is there any way there's a solution? Apparently there's only two. Either Egypt have to get involved and open up the gate and let people go into the Sinai, or can the very south of the area now where the people from Hamas are kettled, so to speak, in Rafah, can that be closed off now as their area and then protected as a neutral zone as long as they stay there? I don't know. All I know is that I don't criticise the Prince of Wales for what he said.
I thought it was very neutral, but I thought it really touched the mood of the whole world at the moment, that we don't want Israel to suffer, but too many people are getting killed.
What about the timing on the eve of a Commons vote?
Well,
I think it should have been a different day.
I think people have been influencing Prince William, and I think one of them... Exactly, I think one of them is David Cameron. David Cameron seems to spend his time now, because he probably knows he hasn't got long left as Foreign Secretary of the EU, to establish himself as a world statesman. You know, turning up in the Falklands, getting involved in the Middle East situation. Is this man the saviour of the world? And I think he's probably pulled a stroke with all the mandarins who are his friends in the Foreign Office to convince Downing Street and the Palace that this is a good thing.
I think the truest thing that's been said on this show all day, actually, Mike Perry. What do
The
you
horror
reckon?
is that there is absolutely no way on earth that the Israel Defence Force is going to pull back from Rafah as long as there's about a 2,000-strong Hamas army there, and the leaders of it, the ones who aren't in Dubai or in Bahrain, are actually there. There's no way they're going to... Now, America, you're quite right, Mike, on one point, that America is the only point who can actually put pressure on this. But the reality is that Israel, they simply cannot now stand back. If they did, they would be allowing the...
Can they not kettle them there, Stephen? Can they not just confine them in Rafah and surround it with a ring of steel, as we would call it, and say, you stay here
rather than invading?
Exactly.
You can't put 2 million people in a place the size of Basingstoke. You just can't do it.
Well, it's not a big place. That's why I mean it can be defended. It can be encircled.
It can, but on the other hand, can you just imagine what that would look like to the rest of the world? These people crammed into a space, shoulder to shoulder, impossible.
Isn't it better than the Israeli ground troops going in and more people being killed?
The thing is, at the moment, Hamas is actually fighting back. If Hamas is still a fighting force, they're still there, they're still firing. And it's not just Hezbollah coming down from Lebanon, it is Hamas in the south.
Yeah, I agree.
So as long as that is happening, then there's absolutely no way that Israel can...
And who says Hamas want a ceasefire?
They don't want a ceasefire.
They'd love a ceasefire.
No, they don't want a ceasefire.
Absolutely love a ceasefire. A rearming, a rearm and a re-equip. Ceasefire.
They've made it perfectly clear in open public statements. We're looking forward to the next October the 7th. Don't worry, we're here and we're going to do it.
You know, in the way that the mood of the world has changed in terms of encouraging Israel to pull back now with these offensives, given that there are 30,000 orphaned children now in Gaza. There was some footage, which is not quite verified yet, that was emerging this morning on social media, of the Palestinian people started to campaign against Hamas.
Yes.
Because they are too exhausted by this situation. If that happens, Stephen, that changes things significantly, doesn't it?
The entire dynamic changes. Everything changes if that's the case. At the moment, as long as Hamas, their mission statement is the utter and total destruction of every single Jewish Israeli person, and and the end of it, the destruction of Israel. As long as they say that, you cannot negotiate and deal with them. And as long as they have the legitimacy of 2 million votes and people saying we're going to vote for you, then it makes the Israeli situation impossible. If some very courageous people are actually standing against them, because they must know that Hamas are taking the food, they're taking the money, they're taking all this humanitarian aid and using it to build tunnels. And,
Indeed. And Stephen, anybody who speaks up will be very quickly silenced, because Hamas don't just, believe in the rule of law within what they're doing. They will not tolerate opposition.
They'd be like somebody laying flowers for Navalny in Moscow.
Yeah, just like Putin.
What do you make of the Prince of Wales? Was he right?
I think it's difficult. I mean, I do tend to disagree with Nigel Farage most of the time on ethical and political grounds. But however, he said, how can you switch from the BAFTAs one day to Gaza the next?
He said stick to the BAFTAs.
And he did.
So you think he should?
No, I personally think that he is perfectly entitled to make these statements.
Was it a mistake, Mike, in the wording when he said he's concerned about the loss of life, the casualty, since October the 7th, which some people are now saying, oh, he didn't mind he's not criticising the loss of life caused by Hamas on October the 7th.
Well,
was that clumsily phrased?
No, because I was reminded very quickly that after October the 7th, he condemned it out, and I think he's passed on from that now.
But did he need to do that again?
No, I don't think so, because I think otherwise, then his critics would have said, well, that nullified the whole piece. The fact that he brought October the 7th back up, which he'd already referred to, nullifies anything he was trying to do. I think he has actually set a template to start the discussion front about, you know, stopping people getting killed. I think it was courageous.
But he did say the release of the hostages has to happen. There
Exactly,
has to be a
he did.
condition. Now, the point
he
is...
didn't use the word ceasefire either.
No, he certainly didn't. He used a similar words, actually, to what Keir Starmer's been using. But when he actually talks about the release of the hostages, is that going to happen? Don't forget, negotiations so far have freed 105 hostages, I think, and only 3 have been actually rescued by the Israeli Defence Force.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a possibility. I mean, don't forget, most of the hostages freed were from Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand. It's terrifying.
Let's talk about a story closer to home, if we can. Let's talk about this Martha's Law story, Martha's Rule. It's going to be adopted in 100 English hospitals from April. Some good out of an awful story, Mike.
Well, you say some good out of an awful story, but this is... consistently, we see this happening, don't we, where parents who don't get justice, natural justice... It started years ago, I remember, when I was working in newspapers and Sarah's Law was introduced, do you remember?
Right, I do.
And I think that was the first one I can remember, and that had a great deal of success. And I think since then, they've learned how to build up public support, you know, just knocking on politicians' doors, writing to your MP and all that. But you make a public campaign of it. So, look, you can only wish them tremendous success with this. And if it's introduced in NH hospitals from April, my only worry is this yet another level of paperwork and bureaucracy within the National Health Service, and how much of their time is going to be taken up on it?
Well, I'd like to think the doctors would embrace it. Just to give people a bit of background, this is Martha. She was 13 years old, and she fell off her bicycle. She injured her pancreas, and her parents basically said to her mother particularly said to the doctors, I don't think she's got a reaction to the antibiotics she'd given, which the doctor said. She said, I think she's got sepsis, and that kills about 40,000 people a year. She wasn't listened to. She spoke to a nurse. A nurse said, oh, trust the doctors, dear. They know what they're doing. And, of course, poor Martha lost her life. And I think a second opinion in health cases is always a good idea.
I couldn't agree more, but you're implying... I mean, the presupposition for this is that there's a whole team of doctors on duty 24/7 waiting to give second opinions. Now, at the moment, you know, we don't have enough staff in the NHS to run...
That's what I mean, about extra bureaucracy inside hospitals.
It's not extra bureaucracy. We actually, look, anybody in that situation who gets bad news, look at all these cases of these people who've been told that their children have got inoperable cancer, they've got melanomas, you know, they've got blood cancer, and then they want to send them for, you know, sort of proton treatment in Czechoslovakia. It happens... No parent, and for God's sake, we're all humans here, no parent looking at a child who's desperately ill will not want a second and then a third opinion and then a fourth.
Stephen, a lot of people would say, all right, doctor knows best, but doesn't mum nearly always know best about the child? You hear that all the time.
Well, look, I would say that we're used in this country to believing what a doctor tells us because we have such a huge reputation for efficiency inside the NHS. What you've just said about parents, I would qualify that by saying, but you're talking about every parent having a doubt about every diagnosis given to their children by a doctor because of the natural maternal paternal instinct.
You don't know. I think this is in a particular case where somebody is edging towards being in a very critical situation or perhaps losing their life, that the family should have a right to say you need to bring somebody else in. And actually, I would like to think that good doctors would also support this.
Well, doctors do that, you know. I mean, all those years I spent at the Middlesex Hospital, admittedly in an ancillary capacity, but very often when there was a serious one, the doctor would say, I just want to get the consultant in to have a look at this. And but the thing is, I was at a funeral a couple of weeks ago.
But that's when the NHS wasn't under siege.
Yeah, I agree with it, but what I'm just going to say, I think sepsis is also a factor here. Kate Gavin's funeral, she was the mayoress of Ealing, she fell over and broke her arm and was dead of sepsis within 5 days of being admitted to hospital. Sepsis is rapid and it's lethal, and you're quite right, Bev, to actually talk about the number of people who die from it. So I think sepsis is a particular horror.
Isn't this a bit harsh on the doctors involved and the NHS? Because we look for doctors to be 100% right 100% of the time, but nobody in any job is 100% right 100% of the time, are they?
They've not been omnipotent since Harold Shipman, to be honest.
That's possibly the most terrible tone of joke we've heard from...
It's not a joke.
Even by your standards.
The reality is that you used to trust politicians, priests and doctors.
Oh, I see.
And trust them broken down in so many... and police.
Only politicians.
That wasn't quite the dark joke I thought you were aiming for, though.
No.
Anyway, right, stay with us, gentlemen.
We will get to that
Oh, yeah, the story that's making my blood boil. It's about the ITV drama.
And that blooming person who claims to be a woman wants to cycle against women.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Emily Bridges.
Emily Bridges. Now, still to come, 1930s Germany. No, Britain in 2024. The Home Office are investigating after a baby had Israel crossed out on their birth certificate. That and much more after your morning's news with Sam.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much. It's 10:31. The headlines from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer is aiming today to avoid a rebellion as some Labour MPs threaten to vote in favour of an SNP motion calling for an immediate halt to the fighting in Gaza. It has the potential to reignite a bitter row within the party. And the last time the SNP called for the motion, which failed in November, more than 50 of Sir Keir's MPs rebelled against him. He has now, though, shifted his stance to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but says it's dependent on both Israel and Hamas stopping the violence. However, the government has now presented its own proposal, calling for what they've called a humanitarian pause. It's now up to the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, to determine which of the amendments will be debated later. Meanwhile, Israel has thanked Prince William after he released a statement calling for the fighting in Gaza to stop as soon as possible, he says. An Israeli spokesperson said they also want the fighting to end and pointed to comments the Prince of Wales made in October, which they say reaffirm that Israel does have the right to defend itself. Patients and their families will have quick and easy access to a second medical opinion if they're worried about a condition getting worse. Martha's Rule comes into force in April, which means an urgent review by a different critical care team can be requested if a patient's condition is getting rapidly worse. It follows the death of 13-year-old Martha Mills in 2021, who developed sepsis while she was under the care of King's College Hospital in London because her symptoms were missed. And in the last hour, we've heard that actor and comedian Ewan McIntosh, best known for playing Keith in the UK sitcom The Office, has died at the age of 50. Star and creator of the series, Ricky Gervais, has paid tribute, saying it's extremely sad news and called him an absolute original. Mr. McIntosh also appeared in other British comedies, including Miranda and Little Britain. His family have released a statement today saying he passed away peacefully, and they thanked all those who supported him, including staff at the care home where he had been looked after. Ewan McIntosh, who has died today at the age of 50. Those are the headlines. For more, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this morning. The pound will buy you $1.2612 and €1.1679. The price of gold is currently £1,608 and 74 pence. That's per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,649 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come this morning. Does Britannia rule the waves? Well, apparently not, because our Royal Navy has failed yet again to launch a Trident missile. The former Defence Select Committee's chairman, Tobias Elwood, will join us to tell us if this is just normal or is it genuinely this anomaly?
Anomaly.
Come up with.
What a word. Stupid. Humiliation. The word I'd use.
But first, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
We've come to Tunbridge Wells and we're not just in any machine shop. Jota are very special. Now, who are Jota?
So Jota, we're a World Endurance Championship race team. Along with the motorsport heritage, you obviously need a lot of manufacturing background to support this industry. And that's why we got this dedicated machine shop to support exactly that.
And how important is the motorsport industry to the UK economy?
Oh, it's absolutely massive, you know. 7 out of 10 F1 teams are based in the UK. I mean, it's a £1 billion industry. We're a global leader in this economy, in this sector, employing thousands.
And how do small shops like this contribute to that massive industry?
I mean, like the background of us, we are doing a lot of R&D work. I mean, the technologies, they're not even out there yet to the general public. We come in, we design the process and the parts, and eventually you'll see these parts being manufactured in the millions by big OEMs.
And what is it about having a small machine shop like this that lets you do such advanced engineering?
I mean, the background of that, it's about being quick to react. Where we work in the motorsport industry, you know, when a part's needed, it might land on our lap sort of 5 o'clock in the evening. That's needed for the next morning. With that, we develop the processes, how we can go and develop things, get them out there to industry quick. The technology here that we do in motorsport, that trickles down to the automotive sectors. And it's things like you see in your family car, you know. You can thank people like us for why you're getting your MPG.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it, as you know, Eamon. You can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I've proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
offensive. You were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as we said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been telling us at home about the Trident missile failure. James has said, why are you allowed to broadcast this failure? This information does nothing but weaken our defence and helps our enemies. We discussed that in the meeting this morning, actually, didn't we? As to whether we should be talking about this.
It's on the front page of The Sun. Is The Sun not allowed to have a scoop which reveals, for the second time they've tested a Trident missile, it's gone literally belly up.
And maybe we should be holding these people to account, James, I would say. If
Public
there is
money,
a problem.
and one of the most important jobs of government is to keep its nation safe.
That's right.
And this is a very important part of it. We've got our own nuclear deterrent, and it didn't work for a second time.
Yeah, a lot of people talking about Penny Mordaunt, whether she's the saviour of the Conservative Party. Shelley has said, isn't she part of the World Economic Forum? Yes, she is. I would never trust her, and the thought of that is absolutely terrifying. And then Jane has told us both off. We said that we're belittling Penny for holding a sword in a frock. Bev and Andrew, Labour...
Well, she did hold it very nicely. And it was for an hour, and it looked quite heavy.
I would not vote for a Prime Minister on her bicep strength. I don't think that should be part of the qualifying characteristic. But she crucifies Labour at the dispatch box, says Jane.
She is good in the dispatch box.
Yeah.
She has a speciality, which is crucifying the Scottish National Party, because every week we have business questions there on a Thursday, and she's very funny. She's very good on her feet. She's a very good speaker.
It's PMQ today, of course.
And of course, but my issue with her, and I wrote about this during the last Egypt contest, is she's got some, I would say, some very disturbing views on this whole trans debate.
She does. Helen says, what a joke. Penny is totally liberal and might be a good speaker in the House of Commons, that's all. The Tory party needs to stand up again under true conservative values. A lot of you are agreeing with that. And this ceasefire in the Middle East, why is our Parliament, says Bill, wasting precious parliamentary time debating and voting on an issue that won't make any difference and no one will listen to? It's such a good point, Bill.
Well, it's because the Scottish National Party, miles behind in the polls, want to try and cause issues for the Labour Party. That's what it's about.
And Gemma Sina says it will not make a blind bit of difference what the outcome of today's vote. Hamas couldn't give two hoots what they vote. And
or
also,
Israel.
neither could Israel. Absolutely. On Prince William, Jack has said he's not the king. He won't be able to make such comments when he is. His father, as Prince of Wales, often commented on various issues. Lots of emails this morning. But I think, you know what, the news agenda is so massively dominated, it seems, often by these big international issues and the House of Commons, and people are just going, can you talk about this country for a change?
Yeah, it's a cost of living crisis. Now, Home Secretary James Cleverly has ordered an urgent investigation after a Jewish baby's birth certificate was returned from the Home Office with tears and with the birthplace of Israel scribbled out.
That's right. The child's father said his family feel like a target and compared it to 1930s Germany.
Well, we're joined now by the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Mond. Morning to you. This is frankly shocking.
Absolutely. And it's just yet another example of institutional anti-Semitism coming into our society. And it's been the case now since the start of the war on the 7th of October. We've seen examples in academia, in schools, in the health service, and now we've got a Home Office situation. And if they ever identify the person who did this, that person needs to be fired. And what is also happening... Sorry, carry on.
No, go on, Gary, carry on. You carry on.
And what is also happening is that there are more and more Jews are now making comparisons between the situation for Jews in the United Kingdom today and 1930s Nazi Germany. Now, I think that's a bit extreme because obviously in Nazi Germany, you actually had a government that was promoting the anti-Semitism and the Jew hatred, which thankfully we don't have here. But we're starting to see incidents that have some resemblance to what happened then. And more Jews are picking this up and are getting deeply fearful and in a few cases even terrorised, particularly as a result of these horrendous marches that are permitted to take place on Saturdays.
Gary, is it the case that Jewish people have always, for the last, let's say, 20, 30 years in this country, experienced prejudice against them that we who are not Jewish have simply not been aware of? Or is it that this has ramped up significantly because of events in the Middle East?
Both of those statements are true. There's been prejudice that many people have generally not been aware of, but it's also most definitely true to say that it's ramped up considerably since the 7th of October. You see, the anti-Semitism historically has come from three sources. In the past, it was very much far-right anti-Semitism, neo-Nazis types. That's much reduced now. The two main sources of anti-Semitism today are coming from the political left, who hate Israel because of it. They believe it's colonial, and also that extends into hating Jews as well. And then there's also fundamentalist Islamic anti-Semitism, which has really exploded in recent years.
Interesting, because I had an expert on this show once and we said off camera, we talked about anti-Semitism, and off camera they said this was predominantly an Islamic problem, but they didn't feel they could say that on TV. Does it now seem that people can say that now, since October the 7th?
Personally, I would say that the vast majority of Muslims are not anti-Semitic. I know many Muslims, I work closely with Muslims. There is no issue whatsoever in the majority of cases. However, there is a strain of Islam that harks back to the Quran and harks back to some of the alleged sayings of Muhammad, which takes those sayings literally, like kill Jews wherever you can find them. And it is that strain of Islam, this fundamentalist Islamic attitude, that is driving a lot of the hatred, in my opinion.
How do we solve that, Gary?
This is clearly a major question. I would like to start in the solution by banning these marches on Saturdays. That, I think, would go some way towards assuaging the concerns of the Jewish community. I would actually, although this may not be practical or possible, like to see this Palestinian flag banned, because it isn't really a pro-Palestinian flag. It's an anti-Jewish flag. Where was the concern when tens of thousands of Palestinians were being massacred in Syria by Bashar Assad's regime? We didn't hear a squeak from anybody. But now, because it's Israel that's involved, it's a different ballgame.
Very interesting. Thank you, Gary. Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Mon there.
Up next, our Royal Navy has failed yet again, I'm afraid, to launch a Trident missile. It was rather embarrassing. The Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, former soldier who was the chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee, is going to join us. You're in Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity, when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
And I'm afraid another Royal Navy Trident missile test has failed. It misfired and crashed into the ocean just yards from the nuclear sub that launched it.
That's right. It's the second failed test in a row since 2016. So joining us now is a former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood. Good morning, Tobias. Should this kind of thing happen in testing situations? It's clearly sufficiently shocking that it's the front page of The Sun today.
Yes, it's important that we do this testing because in the case that we ever need them or use them in anger, that they do work. It's worth just pointing out that our nuclear deterrent is the backbone of our defence posture, and its ability to prevent coercion or deter aggression and also help protect our NATO allies is all the more important given where our world is going. Nuclear weapons can be fired from platforms from the air, land or sea. We choose the sea. You've got a picture, I think, of the Vanguard-class submarine there. The United States makes the missile. We make the submarine and the warhead itself. I've done some investigations here. I understand it was some equipment that was actually attached to the missile itself that prevented the firing of the rocket system after the missile had left the submarine. So as a drill, what the sailors went through, the actual protocols and so forth, which were followed to gear up to the firing, all went according to plan, but the actual rocket didn't fire because of the testing equipment. Now, of course, were this to be fired in anger, you wouldn't have that testing equipment strapped on to the missile itself, and therefore, yes, of course, this is embarrassing. We don't like to see this happen. It's made the front page. I'm not so concerned that we are without our nuclear deterrent or in any way should be worried.
Is this America's fault? Is this the Americans who you were working with in Florida?
I don't think it's going to be helpful to sort of portion blame. I think clearly there is fault with the equipment that was designed to do monitor the testing that took place. But the bigger news is that a submarine, HMS Vanguard, which has been out of the water for many, many years because of upgrades and so forth, is now back in the water. This was part of about 190 tests that submarine had to go through to get the green light, if you like, the tick in the box to be able to go to sea for operations. And that's good to see it back as part of our 4-boat program, allowing us to make sure we have that 24/7, 365 nuclear deterrent.
Some people have texted the programme, Tobias, and said, why are the media discussing this? This should be a state secret. But it's absolutely right that we know about it, isn't it?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I can understand that, and there's an awful lot that I could share with you, which I'm not, for that exact reason. But when you are firing a missile from, let's say, offshore of the UK, and it's going to go 2,000 miles, you actually have to warn those ships in the Atlantic, and that's exactly what happened. This is one reason why we know that it did fail, because on the 30th of January, a warning order was given out to shipping in that area. Be aware that you might see something fly across the horizon. And of course, it didn't fly across the horizon. It landed in the sea not far from the submarine.
It flopped. Pretty embarrassing for the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, who was on the ship observing what he thought was going to be a great triumph, and it just sort of belly flopped into the ocean, Tobias.
Yeah, you can look at it that way. I can understand why you would want to say that. Of course, we want to get these things right. I, for one, absolutely believe and have been pushing for further increase in our defence spending, further investment in our Royal Navy. I'm pleased that all the other tests went well, but clearly there will be a lot of people with their, their white overcoats on, looking at this very, very carefully, thinking, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
All right, Tobias Ellwood, good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Still to come. Do we need another TV series about COVID? Bev Turner certainly doesn't think so.
Oh, I think we do, but it's not this one, I can tell you that. There's all sorts of stories that need telling, but this is not it. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. You probably noticed a bit of a wet one today, but it is brightening up in the west this afternoon. Tomorrow, though, more heavy rain rain and gusty winds. Not one but two weather systems piling in from the Atlantic. This one's been bringing the rain already across most places today. Starting to clear now, brighter skies this afternoon for Northern Ireland and cheering up a little bit across Wales and much of Scotland. But for central and eastern England, it stays soggy, it stays blustery. Still pretty mild out there, really, for February. It has been a very mild month so far. Temperatures again getting into the teens, but of course it doesn't feel like that with all the wet weather around. A lot of spray, a lot of surface water on the roads. That band of rain does pull away. Then more showers come into Scotland and Northern Ireland through the evening and overnight. And then we're looking at some pretty intense rain developing into parts of Wales and southwest England by the time we get to the morning time. The winds will also start to pick up once more. It will be a pretty mild night yet again. Some places may stay in double figures. But tomorrow starts very wet for parts of England and Wales. Band of rain swinging through, intense bursts of rain, and then further bouts of rain coming up from the southwest. Gusty winds as well, particularly across the southeast. Could get very lively for a short space of time. Further disruption possible from both the wind and the rain. So do keep up to date with Met Office weather warnings. Best way to do that is on the Met Office website. It will also be turning colder.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And in the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good morning. 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 21st of February. This is Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Good morning. So the political prince, the Prince of Wales, has called for an end to the fighting in Gaza. But do you support the future king getting involved in politics in this way?
And Labour's ceasefire chaos, the Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer facing another potential rebellion from his backbenchers as MPs vote on an SNP-led motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza later today.
Human rights violated? Really? Transgender rider Emily Bridges is ready to take her British cycling ban to the European Court of Human Rights so that she can compete against biologically born women.
Too soon, the new TV drama Nobody Asked For Breathtaking that's set to take us to the front line of the COVID pandemic. We'll bring you more.
Let us know if you've watched that particular drama. I have various issues with it, as you might imagine, particularly the fact that it's been written, created, inspired by one particular doctor who was incredibly influential during the pandemic at whipping up the fear, getting people cancelled, blocking people, censoring debate, not dealing with the data, just dealing with the emotion. But I have more to say on that, and Andrew Pearce will probably try and shut me up. First, though...
No, seen that.
First, though, here is the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's just coming up to 2 minutes past 11. Leading the news this morning, Sir Keir Starmer is aiming to avoid a rebellion today as some Labour MPs threaten to vote in favour of an SNP motion calling for an immediate halt to the fighting in Gaza. It has the potential to reignite a bitter row within the party. The last time the SNP called for the motion, which failed in November, more than 50 of Sir Keir's MPs rebelled against him. He, though, has now shifted his stance to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but says it's dependent on both Israel and Hamas stopping the violence. However, the government has now presented its own proposal, calling for what they say is a humanitarian pause. It's now up to the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, to determine which of the amendments will be debated later. In a rare test launch off the coast of Florida, a Trident missile misfired and crashed into the ocean from a British nuclear submarine, HMS Vanguard. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps was on board when that failure happened. The Ministry of Defence have confirmed the anomaly, but insists the deterrent is still safe, secure and, they say, effective. It's the second Trident missile failure for the Royal Navy, with each missile costing around £17 million. Despite the failure, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood has just told us in the last few minutes it's a sign of military progress.
It's worth just pointing out that our nuclear deterrent is the backbone of our defence posture, and its ability to prevent coercion or deter aggression and also help protect our NATO allies. This was part of about 190 tests that submarine had to go through to get the green light, if you like, to the tick in the box to be able to go to sea for operations. And that's good to see it back as part of our four-boat programme.
In other news, teachers and healthcare workers in England and Wales will legally be required to report cases of child sexual abuse under new government plans. The Home Secretary announced the move this morning, and if staff fail to report an incident, they could face a permanent ban from working with children. The plans will also mean anyone who stops someone from reporting or covers up a disclosure of child sexual abuse could face up to 7 years in prison. James Cleverly has said it will help children keep safe.
Do the right thing. That's all we're saying. Do the right thing. If things are brought to your attention, then report them. And we would prefer that reports happen, that can be investigated and then discounted if they are not examples of criminality. But what we've seen, sadly, is far too many cases where abuse was happening, where it was known to be happening, and action wasn't taken, and that's what we're seeking to address.
Protesters have gathered once again in London as WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange makes his final appeal against possible extradition to the US. The National Union of Journalists is holding a Free Julian Assange demonstration outside the Royal Courts of Justice, and the long-running case could be his final chance to avoid spending the rest of his life in a US jail. Earlier, his brother Gabriel Shipton told GB News that Mr Assange has only ever had good intentions.
I would say he's a journalist and a publisher, but using technology to do that in a new way that maybe we're not so used to. And the thing about this indictment It doesn't really matter if Julian's a journalist or not. What it does is criminalise journalistic activity. So publishing truthful information, the relationship between a source, a journalist and a publisher, that's really what is at the heart of this indictment and why you see journalistic organisations coming out in support of Julian.
In more health news today, patients and their families will have quick and easy access to a second medical opinion. That's if they're worried about a condition getting worse. Martha's Rule, coming into force from April, means an urgent review by a different critical care team can be requested in hospitals if a patient's condition is getting rapidly worse. It follows the death of 13-year-old Martha Mills in 2021, who developed sepsis while she was under the care of King's College Hospital in London because her symptoms were missed. And we've heard this morning that actor and comedian Ewan McIntosh has died at the age of 50. He, as you may well remember, was best known for playing the monotone Keith in the classic British sitcom The Office.
Under strengths, you've just put accounts.
Yeah. Star and creator of the series, Ricky Gervais, has paid tribute, saying it's extremely sad news and called him an absolute original. Mr. McIntosh also appeared in other British comedies, including Miranda and Little Britain. His family have released a statement in the last hour or so saying he passed away peacefully, and they've thanked all of those who supported him, including staff at the care home where he had been looked after. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or of course go to our website gbnews.com/alerts.
What is the time? It's 11:07. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Now, this is going to wind up Bev. There's a new TV drama about COVID, her favourite subject. It's written by Dr. Rachel Clark, who was quite a noisy voice during the pandemic. We're going to get on to her in a minute.
That's right. So the show takes us back to March 2020, to the start of the biggest event in most of our lifetimes, as COVID cases began arriving in hospitals. Let's take a look.
Home this weekend, sorry, it's madness. There's currently no PPE at all.
It's about people wearing bin bags and going home wondering if they're going to die in the night.
Don't go there. We're already there. You know this thing is spreading. They just keep coming, but no one is giving up.
Where do I start? Right, I'm taking a deep breath here. For a start, this has been written by and inspired by a woman who is called Rachel Clark. She was a classic jab-pushing, social distance, advocating anti-science, mask-selling, COVID narcissist is how I would describe some of these people.
She would argue she was arguing for the orthodoxy.
And she was absolutely arguing for the orthodoxy. And that, of course, as you know, has been my issue with this all along. And I want to draw a clear distinction between her and some of the people who have taken that kind of position on this particular drama, I mean, real life and fictional drama, and the hardworking, amazing, tireless, underpaid doctors who work in, and nurses who work in our hospitals every single day. But this drama, for me, is just more about somebody cashing in on the money, the fame, the status of what was a hideous event that we all went through, and it will be completely one-sided. There will be no idea of whether the science was ever right to take away beds so you had social distancing, and the fact that there is a different set of data now than there was at the time.
But it is a drama. And you can take liberties with drama, you can take liberties with facts with drama. Look at The Crown, some ridiculous assertions in The Crown. That's why I stopped watching, I couldn't bear it anymore. And they will argue it's a drama.
It is a drama.
And it's for dramatic effect.
And they're actually, but that's the problem, isn't it? Because there was so much drama in the news during that period of time. And she was on the telly every day, the woman who's apparently written or contributed to the writing of this.
Yeah, she's a doctor. When did she get time to write?
Home this weekend, sorry, it's madness.
Where she actually worked, that remain unanswered. There's a little sort of vagueness about what her particular role was during this period of time. And there's no doubt that the nurses and the doctors were absolutely terrified. But from the start, almost, there was a failure of risk assessment. It was not really understanding. There's one about who was and who was not at risk from a virus that we closed the whole country down for, and we're still seeing the effects of it today. We're still seeing it in the kids with the mental health, with the economy that's crashed, with the NHS that's on its knees. The long-term collateral damage of those decisions won't be handled in this drama. And I think it's incredibly manipulative. And what I hated throughout the whole period of time was how much the British public was manipulated. And I feel like this is just part of that. All emotion, no data, no science.
But, as I say, it's a drama, it's a TV drama, and they can take whatever liberty with facts, whether you agree with the facts or not. Bev and I don't agree on COVID in the first place. But she is a contentious figure, I will argue that, because she often pitched up on TV and radio criticising the government, and she's hypercritical of the Tories in particular.
Absolutely. And
has been for the last 8 or 9 years.
So this idea that she's but this drama goes on about the fact that they didn't have the right PPE. There are some genuine questions to be asked about that. That is a genuine question. But the question also is PPE, did it work in that situation? Did those nurses and doctors have to follow those particular lines down the corridor? Did they have to take off everything every half an hour? Because we knew very quickly that virus wasn't passed on surfaces with fomites. And yet that science was never caught up. It was never corrected when we knew those things. And yet this drama is immortalising what were effectively clinical errors and scientific mistakes. I wouldn't be able to watch it. I really wouldn't be able to watch it. But do you know what? It's interesting. But there are people who... I'm obviously traumatised by that period of time for the very opposite reasons, but a lot of people are traumatised for different reasons. And for the other side of it, and I don't think it would appeal to anybody, because I think if you did lose somebody during that period of time and you weren't allowed to say goodbye to them because of some of these extraordinary authoritarian rules that we placed in terms of social distancing and old people and the use of midazolam, and there are questions that still haven't been answered. Those are the dramas that I want to see being made. And that's the issue, is those dramas won't be made because this narrative is still not sufficiently...
And ITV know also this drama will tap into people's anger over for whatever, whether it's your anger or whether the fact that they lost people they said they shouldn't die.
Yeah.
And what's her name again? Rachel Clark, Dr. Rachel Clark. So, and it's called?
It's called Breathtaking.
There we are. Now, while his brother distracts himself with self-indulgent Good Morning America interviews, we're talking about Prince Harry, of course, Prince William has waded feet first, in my view, into the conflict in the Middle East.
So after meeting Red Cross aid workers, the Prince of Wales said that he's deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict in the Middle East, with too many lives lost.
Well, joining us now is the royal biographer Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, good morning to you. I was talking earlier to Anthony Selden, Sir Anthony Selden, the eminent historian, and I said, I can't ever imagine Her Majesty the Queen writing a statement like this the day before a crucial Commons vote on whether there should be a ceasefire or not. I just can't conceive that she would think it was the right thing to do.
No, you're absolutely right. She wouldn't think it was the right thing to do, which is why she used to get so incredibly upset by what we will used to call the War of the Waleses, because that was taking away the business of government. But and I think that she was always very, very careful being head of state. But of course, William isn't head of state. So there is actually no reason why he can't announce what he feels. There's no, I think King Charles could not say all these things. But William is Prince of Wales. He's not head of state. And he obviously feels that the monarchy should move forward in a slightly new way and be more open. And I understand that, because in order to survive, the monarchy has to change. And I think William is a great advocate of that. And I think he really, really feels very, very strongly. And I think that every word in that statement was pretty careful. But I also agree with you, Andrew, that it was dangerous waters for him.
Ingrid, let me tell you what one of our viewers has got in touch and said. And sometimes for the royals, it's about what they don't say as opposed to what they say. Because Trevor said the prince should look at his own country before he starts jumping on the bandwagon. What does he think about the grooming gangs, mass immigration, NHS going wrong? This is the issue, isn't it? When you wade into anything political, the British people then say, well, what about the thing I feel strongly about? And then he has the potential to feel like he's letting a lot of people down.
Well, actually, standing up for William, he had just made an announcement that they were going to provide homes for the homeless, which was one of the things that William said he really wanted to do. And the announcement about that came almost exactly at the same time as the announcement of what he felt about the Hamas-Israeli situation. So I think William is putting his money where his mouth is, well, sorry, awful old cliche, but I do actually feel that he's trod very carefully, and I think he wants to embrace these things. He has embraced what's going on in the UK. He can't embrace every issue, but he has at least embraced one, which is the homelessness, and he's doing something about it.
Do you think, can I just briefly, Ingrid, the Queen, who was very widely travelled, was never allowed by the Foreign Office to go to Israel because of all the political ramifications. Do you think we're ever going to see King Charles go to Israel? Once the war is over, but, I mean, the war would have to be over, of course.
I think we might. Well, I mean, Prince William went there in 2018, and he was very moved by what he saw. And I believe he met Netanyahu. He met all kinds of people there, and he went to see his great-grandmother's grave, Prince Philip's mum, who was on the Mount of Olives, final resting place. So he was there 4 days. He did a lot, and I think Charles could go there, absolutely. I mean, Charles is a great supporter of all religions. Maybe he would be a better peacemaker than anyone else.
Interesting, really interesting. Thank you, Ingrid. Ingrid Stewart there. Now, we want to pay tribute.
Oh, we do.
To Betty Millicent.
Betty Millicent blog.
Betty Millicent blog?
Yeah.
So Betty died after a short illness a few days after her 102nd birthday. She's a former wartime WAF radio operator. Just to be clear, I'm not boring, Andrew. He's finding the obituary.
I am. Cheers. See here.
Wartime WAF radar operator. It's page 46, apparently.
Cheers. Yeah.
And dearly loved wife of the late Derek James Blogg.
An inspiring woman. We'll tell you more about it. Don't go anywhere. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Still to come this morning. Well, no, not still to come. Well, they're here anyway. Oh, right. First of all, we're going to talk about the transgender cyclist with our panel. Stephen Pound's here. Mike Perry's also here. Right. This is Emily Bridge, transgender cyclist, who is now going to court, Stephen, so that she-born he can compete against female-born competitors. And she's done an interview with ITV, and it is the most narcissistic, self-serving, selfish piece of a delusion that I've heard in a long time.
Don't hold back.
It's
Beverly, you've left me nothing to say.
Well, that would make a change.
Yeah, I must admit, I saw the picture of her yesterday. You've got thighs like Chris Hoy. And she's,
of course.
Yeah, but I don't understand. She's actually been told she can compete in an open entrance, race. They can do that. But the point is...
What do you mean by open entrance?
Well, where there's no sort of male and female.
Right.
Yeah, you can do just basically like people who go weekend cycling, as they do. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the problem is, it's the same with the parkrun situation. All the records that they hold in park, and people take this very seriously, as they do in competitive road cycling. What's the value and the validity of those records if someone who has a massive physical advantage in bone mass, in muscle structure, is actually racing?
So the point is here that the argument is, should she be racing as a transgender woman against men? She's 6'2" high.
Yeah.
For me, the critical test is, has this person gone through puberty as a male?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
How then can you possibly say it's fair for that person to compete on a physical level? And let's face it, cycling is one of the most physical sports in the world.
Yeah.
If you're cycling up a mountain on the Tour de France, you need to be the fittest person in the world. How can you possibly say it's fair for you to compete against a woman who's gone through female puberty? It's ridiculous.
Why doesn't he compete against men?
Because obviously she's got a huge advantage. And Stephen mentioned the open category. Well, if there's an open category, that's fine, go into that. But they see the advantage, physically, they've got him going into the woman category, and now she's claiming, you've ended my career in elite sport. There isn't a career in elite sport for transgenders, I'm afraid.
No.
She said...
But also, she wasn't an elite as a male cyclist.
No, she wasn't.
She was nowhere near elite.
But she's trying to become elite in women's cyclists by having a physical advantage.
And let me tell you why she won't compete alongside men. Because she doesn't feel safe, she says, competing alongside men. And she doesn't think that transgender women should have to out themselves to compete in the category. So if she doesn't feel safe, presumably she means what? Pelotons are dangerous, they are fast, they are potentially... It's a physical endeavour. Well, she has male biology that would therefore render her particularly danger to the female athletes, maybe.
I think she's talking about...
Look, I happen to believe that the people who do go through the whole transgender process become... I mean, I have to say that, I mean, you and I probably disagree about that, but, I think of people like April Ashley and Jan Morris. I think they're demonstrably women, even though they were born men. And there's no question about that.
Yeah.
I think... well, just
to be clear, so you're drawing a distinction there between your biological sex and your chosen gender. And the idea that nature gives you your sex and society, nurture gives you your gender.
But it's not a chosen gender. There are some people who are demonstrably not of their birth, sex. And I think we've got to respect them, and you've got to have some affection.
How do you explain that? Because
what I will not do is to say that they should then have the ability to compete again.
Well, exactly. We've all got sympathy for the situation.
So I think it's two separate situations.
I totally agree. If somebody's locked in their own body and they're having a terrible, tussle within their own mind on happiness, and
it must be awful.
It must be awful, and I've got great sympathy. What we should do is we should work harder to find that class between the two sexes in which they'd feel more comfortable in life, rather than them having to constantly battle to kick doors down to be accepted here or there.
And I'm always arguing about for trans people. I think they are not helped by these noisy.
I totally agree.
The minority who spoil it for most trans who just want to get on with their lives very quietly. Don't want to make any fuss.
I totally agree. The best way to be left alone as a trans person is not to go around banging a drum telling everybody that you're being discriminated against for being a trans person.
It's going to the European Court. Why is the European Court even going to hear the case?
Well, because it's fashionable, isn't it?
Yeah, I can still remember, somebody I dealt with who was trans who said, of course, I was born. Yeah, I was born in a woman's body, and I said, well, to be fair, all of us were.
Steve.
It's a very good point. I don't think he would cut it, though, with the trans activist if you come out with that line.
Oh, God, that's got me cancelled.
Let's go back to our nice old lady who's a bit death notice in the Times today.
Yes.
This is a woman who was a part of the... she was a WAF.
Betty.
One of the very best. Now, obviously, I've got a soft spot for this, and I read this lady's death notice. 102 years of age, very fine age. Sadly, my dad died at 58 after serving in the Second World War, but he went into the war in 1940 at 17. So her memories will be so long. Do you see what I mean? Right back to pre-war and all that. And honestly, I just feel that we've lost one of our best.
I agree.
Because if you ever meet these people, first of all, they never really want to tell you about what they did during the war because they're not boastful people. They just did their duty, right? But secondly, they have an innate dignity within them. You know, when you've seen the interviews with the girls who were the code breakers and all that, they will talk about it. It's almost like you've got to drag it out of them, you know what I mean? Because they feel we just did our duty, you know?
And Mike, just before, my mother was a Wren, Women's Royal Naval Service, and she was, before she died, and God rest herself, she and I were walking down Whitehall to see the statue there for the women of World War II that Betty Boothroyd insisted...
The first woman speaker.
It is, indeed, but it's also, there has all the uniform coats hanging up there.
That's right.
But this story, I agree with Mike on that. I don't like to, but I do on this particular one. But, I think I love that the funeral directors are called True Love and Co. But she's asked, instead of money to be, spent on flowers, give it to aid to the elderly. Now, I'd quite like to know what aid to the elderly is, because, I mean, hey, I'm here.
Okay. Listen, we just want to get another story. And earlier, GBNews spoke to the Minister for Farming, Mark Spencer. I love the fact that's his name, our Minister for Farming, about the government's plans to support British farmers. Have a listen.
I actually think it's been really optimistic and it's been really constructive. I actually quite enjoy listening to farmers and engaging with them, taking their feedback. So the whole event's been very constructive. Farmers are up for feeding the nation and saving the environment. I mean, it's a recognition actually of how important number 10 recognised food production is. It's a recognition of how important the Prime Minister knows we are as a sector. So I think it's a big message that we understand how important farmers are and we want to engage and listen to their concerns and help them solve the challenges that we face.
How can you commit to, ensuring these farmers get that funding, as soon as possible?
We are going to roll that money out very quickly, get it onto farm to make sure that those farmers are getting the right support so that their businesses can remain profitable, because we need them to continue to feed the world, continue to produce great British food, but also do that with a smaller environmental footprint and improved biodiversity at the same time.
What are you saying to the Chancellor about do you need more money? Do you feel like farming needs more money to be that successful and provide the food security that you're wanting to...
I think we're building a really strong case that says to the Exchequer that actually we are delivering public goods. Clearly, food production is a public good, and we can do that in a way which reduces our environmental footprint, helps with the battle against climate change. That is a good use of taxpayers' money.
Do you think of those protests out in Europe? Are you concerned that we could see we've already seen some at the port of Dover, that farmers are coming to a boiling point where we could see those kind of protests?
I'm not seeing that in England, certainly, because I think we are listening and engaging with farmers and we're responding to their concerns. We are seeing that in Wales, of course, because the Welsh Government is not listening to their farmers. So I think we need to carry on the dialogue, continue to support British farmers to produce top quality food and look after our environment.
Briefly then, gentlemen, is this a win for British farmers, Stephen?
No, the problem here is that the British consumer wants to pay the cheapest rate. I was in the supermarket yesterday and I was saying, why in God's name are the tomatoes being flown in from Italy? Why are the avocados being flown in from Ecuador? Insane. OK, maybe we can't grow avocados, but we certainly can grow tomatoes all the year round in polytunnels. So the problem is until the consumer is prepared to pay a fraction more... for British food.
Mike, in a word, really.
Well, one of the biggest failures of Brexit is that we didn't revolutionise our farming policies.
Yeah, I agree.
We relied on Europe for 15 or 20 years on a common agricultural policy. When we got it back ourselves, we should have initiated a great farming policy, and we didn't.
Couldn't agree more. Right, up next, we've got to move on.
Subsidy junkies.
Up next, Labour MP Steve McCabe is joining us to talk about today's Gaza ceasefire parliamentary vote. Don't go anywhere. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with GB News. Britain's Newsroom is coming up next, but first, the headlines at 11:30. Sir Keir Starmer is aiming to avoid a rebellion as some Labour MPs threaten to vote in favour of an SNP motion calling for an immediate halt to the fighting in Gaza. It has the potential to reignite a bitter row in the party. The last time SNP called for the motion, which failed in November, more than 50 of Sir Keir's MPs rebelled against him. He, though, has now shifted his stance to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but says it's dependent on both Israel and Hamas stopping the violence. However, the government has now presented its own proposal, calling for what they say is a humanitarian pause. It's now up to the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, to determine which amendments will be debated later. A Trident missile misfired and crashed into the ocean from the British nuclear submarine HMS Vanguard. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps was on board when that rare test took place off the coast of Florida. The Ministry of Defence says it was unusual, but insists the deterrent is still safe, secure and, they say, effective. It's the second Trident missile failure for the Royal Navy, with each one costing around £17 million. Despite the misfire, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood told GB News it's actually a sign of military progress. Patients and their families will have quick and easy access to a second medical opinion if they're worried about a condition getting worse. Martha's rule comes into force from April and means an urgent review by a different critical care team can be requested if a patient's condition is getting rapidly worse. It follows the death of 13-year-old Martha Mills in 2021, who developed sepsis while she was under the care of College Hospital in London because of her symptoms being missed. And actor and comedian Ewan McIntosh has died today at the age of 50. You may remember he was best known for playing the monotone Keith in the classic British sitcom The Office.
Under strengths, you've just put accounts.
Yeah.
Star and creator of the series, Ricky Gervais, has paid tribute, saying it's extremely sad news, calling him an absolute original. Mr McIntosh also appeared in other British comedies, including Miranda and Little Britain, and his family have released a statement saying he passed away peacefully, and they've thanked all of those who supported him, including staff at the care home where he had been looked after. Ewan McIntosh, who has died at the age of 50.
And then you just tick one of the boxes.
Those are the headlines. For more, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this morning. The pound will buy you $1.2617 and €1.1681. The price of gold is currently £1,608.66, that's per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,656 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
11:36. You're still with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson Turner, and they're still here. Former Labour MP Stephen Pound and the broadcaster Mike Parry. We want to talk about Trinny Woodall. Do you know who she is, by the way, Stephen?
Trinny and Suzanne?
Exactly.
Yeah, very good.
So made quite famous
House
in
makeup
the
people.
late
Yeah.
90s, early 2000s, and it was Trinny Woodall and Susanna, and they would do these makeover shows, right? And then they kind of fell out of public view.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a bit of news about Trinny.
Well, I think they had a kind of 5-year TV show or something like that. Now, Trinny Woodall was also married to Charles Saatchi, wasn't she?
She was. Very wealthy man.
A very wealthy man indeed, and that didn't end up well. We all know the famous stories about, is it Simpsons, the restaurant they were in? Scott's, thank you. Anyway, the point of the story is, when her TV show ended, she was literally broke, right?
Yeah.
She goes off and decides to start a new venture, and it's a skin cream which costs £26 a tube.
Whoa.
Right, £26 a tube. But, well, I get this, Andrew.
I hate to tell you, fellas, but that's nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Figures published today...
Lidl, was it?
...show that her yearly profits on this £26 tube of skin cream is £56 million.
Wow.
£56 million profit.
Stephen, how many tubes
from
have
nothing.
you been buying?
From nothing.
I have to say...
Well, obviously none when you look at his face.
Yes, quite.
Well, charming. I don't have to come here to be insulted, you know. I tend to use polyfiller.
Well, quite.
Well, but do you know what this...
That's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, but is that worldwide? Because it can't just be within the UK.
Yeah, but how would... So she's actually invented a skin cream, or she's lent her name to a skin cream?
No, she's worked on it, hasn't she, Bev? She's actually worked on the formula.
She has her own...
Hang on a second. About 10 years ago, Boots came out with this miracle cream that was supposed to be rejuvenating, and it
didn't work for you, did it?
Right, so her brand is called Trinny London.
Have a pop, why don't you?
She has her
just because you've got hair.
Brand of makeup, skin creams, anti-aging products, and she's huge on social media. So she has a very impressive
Say no more.
Instagram following. She has a very impressive...
So social media is where she's made her money.
Social media is where she made her money. And let me tell you, you think that we'd managed to get young women and girls in this country to think that what matters is what they say rather than what they will look like. Not anymore. Social media has wound that clock back 20 years. So you've got a whole new generation of young people who are using anti-aging products at 13, 14, 15 years old.
That's really disturbing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very disturbing. But the reason I admire this woman so much is, A, I like rich people, particularly self-starters like that.
Correct.
But she's done this at the age of 60.
Yeah.
So,
Good
you know,
for her.
she's not a pop star, age 23, who's become a billionaire.
Yeah.
She started something absolutely unique and made it a huge success.
And it helps, doesn't it, Bev, that she looks pretty good.
She looks amazing for 60.
She does not look 60.
I mean,
we'll get an image.
But I think surely Bev's raised a much more interesting point. And this is this business about people... In my part of the world, there's a whole load of shops that sell skin lightening creams for people with black skin.
Yeah.
Really?
That is horrible.
Golly.
Do you think that somebody's wanting to do that?
So this is Trini Woodall. That's her on the right, obviously. She's 60.
She does not look 60.
I presume that is her daughter. Look, she's had a lot of cosmetic surgery as well, let's be clear. And I think this is... she's had... She might call them tweakments. I don't think she shies away from this.
Those lips, I have to say, don't look very natural.
Her lips are not normal. They're not natural.
No, I think that's unfair. I've spoken to ladies about this. The thing about lips these days is some of them do have the traveller's thing, but I think I'm right, Bev, in saying that the stuff that ladies put on their lips now does... no, I think the exterior of their lips does bring out the shape and the and the attraction of the lips.
You talk to ladies on the tube about this. Come and sit there. Excuse me, my dear, is that a trout pout?
I can promise you that there's no lipstick going to make your lips look like that at 60 years old. There are some products which might make them more luscious.
But actually, I think there should be an age limit on those lip jobs, because you sometimes see kids of 18 and 19 and
I totally agree. And if they happen to be trying to chase a footballer, they get bigger and bigger and bigger.
And you know what, Matt, and do you know what really bothers me about it is my daughter, when she was about 10 or 11, and she said to me, "Mummy, when are my lips going to grow?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "When am I going to have my lips like these ladies?" And of course, everyone is full of lip fillers and plumping and plumping. And I understand. I get it.
But in some cases, you can't have the operation until you're 18 or 21. But I think they then go abroad, and you think of this that poor woman who died in South America because she was having a butt lift. She had silicone injected.
No, you're absolutely right. And by the time they get back here, the damage is done. And sometimes the NHS can't save them. They're full of poison and all that kind of stuff.
But I'm still reading from Bev saying £26 for a tube of face cream is cheap.
It is, believe me.
What do you pay for a tube of face
I
cream?
use Vaseline.
Oh, but
I'm a Vaseline girl. Take my makeup off with it, moisturise.
Many of my friends.
I know some jars,
and I love it.
Some jars of cream. This is a personal experience from a lady friend of mine. Can cost £300.
What?
Oh, easily.
No, oil of Ulay is what you want.
Right.
Good old-fashioned
Stephen Pound beauty tips. Who'd have thought it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And can I just say, don't heed them. Look at him.
Right. Up next. We're going to be going to PMQs in just a moment. This is the day, of course, when we hand over to Gloria Di Piero and Christopher Hope for our fantastic PMQs programme. What's it going to be like there today, do you think, guys? Stephen, is it going to be a historic day for PMQs? We've got Middle East, we've got failed submarines, by-elections.
Well, what you've got is actually that just before PMQs, at about 11 o'clock outside the main entrance and St Stephen's entrance, there will be the two victors of the two by-elections will be greeted with a vast crowd of Labour MPs. And so Labour will then introduce them to the House of Commons, and hopefully that will be a big lift. However, when we then come on to the SNP motion on Gaza, then it's going to be very tense, very difficult, and it's going to be a very, very hard one for Keir Starmer to actually bridge.
But also, let's hope they're not going to play party politics at Prime Minister's questions over war in Gaza.
Very relaxed Prime Minister. Sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. Leaving Downing Street. A bit of a drizzly day out there.
And we'll find out soon whether the Labour motion has been called by the Speaker, because I don't think we know yet.
No, we don't, because in effect there's sort of almost three, if you like. There's the SNP
government, Labour,
and the SNP
decide. And it's likely he won't call the Labour one, he'll call the government one, because he can say the SNP one does what the Labour one does.
Well, just explain that to us. How does that work then? Why does the Speaker get to decide which of those?
He is the custodian of the Commons, and he decides what motions are called and what aren't. And
but can't he be accused of being prejudiced in favour of what he thinks?
No, the reason is, I mean, we had dreadful problems when Mr. Burko, of blessed memory, was in the check. Well, but the point was that the precedent for a speaker to call the motion is does it duplicate the main motion?
That's right.
Does it add or subtract from? So, in other words, you can have what we used to do. Very, very often we put what we call wrecking motions.
Yes.
Where we have a motion we didn't like, and we then put a counter motion or another one which we actually rectify. Yeah. And we also have what we call pecking motions as well, where we took bits of the other one.
But the SNP put the motion down first, and it calls for an immediate ceasefire. Labour are calling for an immediate ceasefire, but with caveats. So why do you?
Indeed. So the Speaker will probably say that completely negates the principal motion.
OK, we will find out what Mike thinks PMQs is going to be like after this quick break.
Or maybe not.
Anywhere. We're all up against the clock today because it is PMQs. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, 11:47, another Royal Navy Trident missile test has failed.
That's right, this misfired. It crashed into the ocean just yards from the British nuclear submarine that launched it. It's the second failed test in a row since 2016. Now, former MP, Stephen Pound, I just put you back in the House of Commons.
You're a Navy man, Stephen.
Yeah, many years ago.
Many years ago. So is this sort of normal? We have to do these tests, they won't always work. Is it embarrassing?
It is. I mean, in the ships I served, I mean, the last ship I ever served in, our missile system was called Harpoon, which made a screaming noise. And we actually had a target, which was a hulk with a hole in the middle that we used to have to fire at it. But they cost so much money, you know, to actually launch these things that, you know, we did it very rarely. The Trident missile is a different matter altogether. It costs absolute millions. And what amazes me about this is the fact that that Tobias Ellwood, who was briefly a defence minister, actually said, oh, yeah, but this shows what a great success is and how, Britain's nuclear defence is safe in our hands. Well, actually, we've got 4 V-boats. Only 4 in that fleet. 2 of them are on what we call continuous at-sea deterrent. Yeah. One's probably in Faslane and the other's in Devonport. We don't know. We've got 4, and one of them can't launch the primary missile that it's built. Because don't forget, these submarines are built around the missile.
Yeah.
When you come in there.
And Stephen, the last time we tested one, that failed too.
I was afraid you were going to mention that.
So that's 2 tests in 6 years, and they both failed.
And you know what's going to happen?
This was like a high-sea diver belly flopping.
Well, the objection that many of us had at the time to actually, pay for this was that the Americans built it.
Sorry
the Americans
to interrupt you, Stephen. We've got someone more important than you. We're joined by Admiral Lord West, who is the first Sea Lord and Chief of the Naval Staff. Thank you so much for joining us. What is your assessment of this test? Is it just an anomaly and these things happen?
First of all, I don't think I'm more important than anybody, just to get that.
You're more
I like to keep him in his place.
You're more important than Stephen Pound, Lord West, trust me.
Those people are.
Well, I was aware this had happened just shortly after it happened, as you can imagine. And I was surprised, actually, that the media didn't pick it up sort of the next day, because actually we announced it's going to happen, all that. So that was interesting. Anyway, I'm glad in a way it took a week or so for someone to pick it up, because it means now we've been able to look at all the detail of exactly what happened. And it is quite clear that this does not affect the primary capability of the system at all. And I think the really good news coming out of it was because the government took so long to decide to replace the Vanguard submarines with a new batch of submarines, the Dreadnoughts, we've had to run them on much longer than we expected. And so, for example, the Vanguard, which was the one doing this firing, has just had a 7-year refit. I mean, unbelievable. But the good news is that every bit in that submarine works brilliantly. The Americans were amazed by the crew proficiency, and it's quite clear now, having gone in great detail into all of what happened, that the actual boat and the mechanism to get it out of the boat all work perfectly. And there is, as they describe, an anomaly, because they, for security reasons, can't talk about what it is within the test firing, is why that missile didn't work. And I'm certain that is the case.
OK, well, a little bit of good news. I'm sorry it was so short and sweet, but we are up against the clock because someone even more important than you, Admiral Lord West, the Prime Minister, is waiting to talk as well. Don't go anywhere. We've got to take a very quick break.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. You probably noticed a bit of a wet one today, but it is brightening up in the west this afternoon. Tomorrow, though, more heavy rain and gusty winds. Not one, but 2 weather systems piling in from the Atlantic. This one's been bringing the rain already across most places today. Starting to clear now, brighter skies this afternoon for Northern Ireland and cheering up a little bit across Wales and much of Scotland. But for central and eastern England, it stays soggy, it stays blustery. Still pretty mild out there, really, for February. It has been a very mild month so far. Temperatures again getting into the teens, but of course it doesn't feel like that with all the wet weather around. A lot of spray, a lot of surface water on the roads. That band of rain does pull away, then more showers come into Scotland and Northern Ireland through the evening and overnight. And then we're looking at some pretty intense rain developing into parts of Wales and southwest England by the time we get to the morning time. The winds will also start to pick up once more. It will be a pretty mild night yet again. Some places may stay in double figures. But tomorrow starts very wet for parts of England and Wales. Band of rain swinging through, intense bursts of rain, and then further bouts of rain coming up from the southwest. Gusty winds as well, particularly across the southeast. Could get very lively for a short space of time. Further disruption possible from both the wind and the rain. So do keep up to date with Met Office weather warnings. Best way to do that is on the Met Office website. It will also be turning colder.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we're going straight to Gloria De Piero and Christopher Hope now for Prime Minister's Questions Live, because it's that time of the week for you to be sending your questions.
Yeah, you know why this show is different from the other Prime Minister's Questions shows, because it's all about what our viewers and listeners would be asking the Prime Minister, and then we put it to our fantastic panel.
Please send us your questions and tell us who you are and, most importantly, where you're from. And those questions we'll put to our panel, gbviews@gbnews.com. PMQs Live is all about you. But first, as a tradition, Andrew and Bev, briefly, Bev, what will you both ask the PM?
Briefly, go on, Andrew.
Well, I've got a very straightforward question. Did the Prime Minister welcome Prince William's unexpected intervention in the great